There's a 38-year-old engineer in Seattle who just bought his second rental property. Good shape, stable career, interesting hobbies. Last month he deleted every dating app from his phone. Not in anger, not after a bad breakup, just calmly uninstalled them like you'd remove any other app that stopped serving its purpose. When his coworker asked why, he said something that stuck with me. I finally did the math. That's what's happening right now. Men across every age bracket, 30s, 40s, 50s, even guys in their 60s, are running the numbers on modern dating and arriving at the same conclusion. The equation doesn't balance, and unlike previous generations who might have pushed through anyway, these men are making a different choice. They're choosing themselves. This isn't about incels or basement dwellers or men who can't get dates. This is about men who can date, who have dated, who looked at the entire system and decided it's fundamentally broken. There are 5 specific reasons driving this exodus, and I guarantee you felt at least 3 of them yourself. Let's start with the most obvious one that nobody wants to say out loud. Reason 1. The illusion of choice is actually a cage. I want you to picture something. You walk into a supermarket. The cereal aisle has 400 different boxes. You stand there for 20 minutes trying to choose. You finally grab one, take it home, and while you're eating it, you're wondering if one of the other $3.99 would have been better. That's not abundance. That's paralysis disguised as freedom. Dating apps sold everyone the same lie. More options equals better outcomes. They were wrong, catastrophically wrong. There's a guy named Jordan whose story I found buried in a dating subreddit. Mid-40s, divorced 5 years ago, got on the apps because that's what you're supposed to do now, right? Within the first month, he matched with over 200 women. Sounds great on paper. In reality, it destroyed something in him he didn't even know he had, his ability to be present with one person. Every conversation became provisional. Every date came with an invisible asterisk. This is nice, but there are 47 other conversations happening right now that might be nicer. He'd be sitting across from a perfectly interesting woman at dinner, and his brain would be calculating odds. Is this the best I can do? Should I keep searching? Here's what the data shows. When people have too many choices, they make worse decisions. It's called choice overload, and it's killing relationships before they even start. Women on dating apps experience this as an avalanche of attention, so much that it becomes meaningless. Men experience it differently. They swipe through hundreds of profiles that all start to blur together, and even when they match, there's this nagging feeling. Am I settling by focusing on just one? The paradox is brutal. The apps promise unlimited access to potential partners, but that very abundance makes it impossible to value any single person. You're not dating humans anymore. You're shopping for the perfect product that doesn't exist, constantly one swipe away from an upgrade. Jordan eventually deleted everything. His exact words, "I'd rather be genuinely single than fake available to 200 people I'll never actually connect with." There's another layer to this that men don't talk about enough. The constant rejection. One study found that the average man gets a response to about 1 in 50 messages. Think about what that does to your psyche over time. You put yourself out there 50 times, try to be genuine, try to be interesting, and 49 times you get silence. Not even a no thanks. Just silence, like you don't exist. A guy named Tom told me he started tracking his metrics like a business analyst. Over 6 months on 3 different apps, he sent 847 messages. He got 23 responses. Of those, 4 turned into dates. Of those dates, 0 turned into second dates. His words, "I've had job applications with better success rates. At least when they reject you for a job, they send an email." But here's where it gets darker. The choice overload isn't just a psychological inconvenience. It's being weaponized against you. Reason 2, you're not the customer, you're the inventory. Let me tell you about how these companies actually make money, because once you see it, You can't unsee it. Tinder's parent company, Match Group, generated $3.8 billion in revenue last year. They own Hinge, OkCupid, Plenty of Fish, and about 40 other dating platforms. Here's the question nobody asks. What happens to their profits if people actually find lasting relationships? They collapse. Think about it. If dating apps were good at creating successful relationships, everyone would use them once, meet someone, and never come back. That's a terrible business model. What's a great business model? Keeping you on the platform forever, always almost finding what you're looking for but never quite getting there. There's a software developer named Chris who reverse engineered some of the algorithms these apps use. What he found is chilling. The apps don't optimize for compatibility, they optimize for engagement. They're not asking, who would make a good partner for this person? They're asking, what will keep this person opening the app? Those perfect 10s that show up in your feed? The ones you never match with? They're bait. The algorithm shows you impossibly attractive people, just often enough to keep you swiping, paying for boosts, subscribing to premium tiers. You're being shown the steak while being fed scraps. And the premium features, do they actually work? According to internal data that leaked a few years ago, paying users on Tinder saw only a marginal increase in matches. Single-digit percentages. You're paying $40 a month for a 4% improvement in a system deliberately designed to frustrate you. Here's the really insidious part. The apps have perfected something called intermittent reinforcement. It's the same psychological mechanism that makes slot machines addictive. You get just enough wins, just enough matches, just enough conversations that go somewhere to keep you hooked. But not enough to actually succeed. A therapist I spoke with told me she's seeing more men in their 30s and 40s with phone addiction specifically tied to dating apps. They check them compulsively, hundreds of times a day, getting little dopamine hits from matches that go nowhere. One client told her, I know it's destroying my self-esteem, but I can't stop. What if the next swipe is the one? Men are catching on. When you realize you're not the customer, you're the product being sold to advertisers, or worse, you're the disposable inventory in a system designed to keep everyone perpetually unsatisfied. The only winning move is to stop playing. One guy put it perfectly in a forum. They're not failing to connect me with matches. They're succeeding at keeping me engaged without delivering results. Once I understood that, I was done. But even if you opt out of the apps completely, the third reason still hits you where it hurts. Reason 3, the audit never ends. Here's something women don't fully understand about modern dating from the male perspective. You're not being chosen for who you are. You're being evaluated against a checklist that keeps growing longer. I came across a survey recently that made my jaw drop. Women were asked what income level they'd consider acceptable in a long-term partner. The median answer, $110,000 per year. Not ideal, not preferred, acceptable. That's the floor, not the ceiling. Meanwhile, median income for men in the US is around $60,000. Do the math. 2/3 of men don't even qualify to be considered. There's a 41-year-old paramedic named Derek who makes about $55,000 a year. He owns his condo, has zero debt, volunteers with a youth sports program, stays in good shape, reads constantly. By any reasonable measure, he's got his life together. But on dating apps, he might as well be invisible. He told me something that hit hard. I save lives for a living. I'm good at it. I'm proud of it. But apparently I'm not good enough because I don't make 6 figures. And it's not just money. There's height. Under 6 feet. Automatic disqualification for a shocking number of women. According to one survey, 96% of women prefer men taller than them, and 37% won't date anyone under 6 feet. Only 14% of American men are 6 feet or taller. You see the problem? There's the expectation that you'll pay for dates while also respecting her financial independence. There's the demand for emotional availability while maintaining mysterious unavailability. You need to be ambitious but not a workaholic, successful but not intimidating, confident but not arrogant, sensitive but not weak, masculine but emotionally literate. The goalposts don't just move, they multiply. I talked to a 49-year-old architect named Stephen who's been dating on and off for 8 years since his divorce. He described it like being in a never-ending performance review where the metrics keep changing. One woman wants me to be more emotionally expressive. The next one says I'm too much. One wants a man who's established and stable. The next one says I'm boring because I'm not taking enough risks. I feel like I'm auditioning for a role in a play where nobody will give me the script. What's breaking men isn't failing the audit. It's the realization that the audit never ever ends. Even in a relationship, you're being continuously evaluated against other options she has or could have. One bad quarter, a job loss, a health issue, a moment of vulnerability, and suddenly you're back on the chopping block. A divorced man in his 50s wrote something that crystallized this perfectly. I spent 20 years passing audits. The moment I needed support instead of providing it, I failed the only test that actually mattered. Men are waking up to a hard truth. In modern dating, you're only as valuable as your last performance review, and they're walking away not because they can't meet the standards, but because they refuse to live under permanent evaluation. Which brings us to the reason that's causing the most damage, the one nobody wants to acknowledge. Reason 4. Emotional labor is a one-way street. There's a word that's been trending in male spaces lately. Disposable. Men are starting to see themselves the way the culture actually sees them, as utility objects that have value only when useful. Let me share something personal. I have a friend, we'll call him Mike, who went through a rough patch 2 years ago. His father died, his company downsized, and he developed pretty severe anxiety. Through all of it, his girlfriend of 3 years was absent. Not physically absent, she was still there, but emotionally checked out. When he tried to talk about what he was feeling, she'd listen for maybe 90 seconds before changing the subject or offering a generic, "That's tough, babe." But the moment she had a bad day at work, he was expected to provide a full therapeutic session, complete with validation, solutions, and emotional labor. The relationship ended when he pointed out this imbalance. Her response: "I need a man who can handle his problems, not dump them on me." Read that again. He wasn't allowed to have problems. He was allowed to handle problems. There's a universe of difference. The statistics back this up in ways that should terrify anyone who cares about men's mental health. Men account for nearly 80% of suicide deaths. They're 3 times more likely to become homeless. They die earlier, suffer more from isolation, and report higher rates of loneliness. And yet the cultural message remains: figure it out yourself. I read a study recently that found men in relationships report feeling more lonely than single men. Think about that paradox. You're supposedly in a partnership, sharing your life with someone, and yet you feel more isolated than when you were alone. Why? Because many men describe their relationships as places where they have to perform rather than be themselves. When men talk about the emotional one-way street in modern dating, they're not being dramatic. They're describing a system where they're expected to be the rock, the provider, the stable foundation, but God forbid they need to lean on anyone themselves. There's a 47-year-old teacher named Paul who described it like this: "Women want emotional availability right up until you're actually emotional. Then suddenly you're weak, you're not masculine enough, you're a burden." Another guy named Alex told me about the moment he knew his marriage was over. His mother had just been diagnosed with cancer. He came home, sat on the couch and started crying. His wife walked in, looked at him with something close to disgust and said, "Are you going to do this all night? I need to know if you're making dinner." 6 months later, they were divorced. And you know what? He said it was the best thing that ever happened to him. I learned that being alone is better than being with someone who sees your humanity as a weakness. So men learn to shut down. They learn that vulnerability is punished. They learn that their feelings don't matter except as they relate to making her feel better. And eventually they ask themselves, why am I in a relationship where I have to be smaller to fit? The answer increasingly is, I'm not. But there's a fifth reason, and it's the one that seals the deal for most men who walk away. It's about power and what happens when you don't have any. Reason 5, the system protects her, prosecutes you. I need you to meet someone. His name is Robert. He's 52, works in finance, good guy by all accounts. He was married for 16 years. They had 2 kids together. The marriage wasn't perfect. Whose is? But it wasn't terrible either. Until it was. His wife filed for divorce. Within 6 months, Robert had lost the house he'd paid for, was paying alimony despite his wife having a similar income, got custody of his kids 2 weekends a month, and was ordered to continue paying for her car lease. She initiated the divorce. He lost everything anyway. His attorney told him something that still haunts him. Family court isn't about fairness. It's about following a script, and in that script, men are ATMs with legs. The statistics are stark. Men initiate about 30% of divorces, but men bear about 90% of alimony payments. In custody battles, women receive primary custody in roughly 80% of cases, even when both parents are equally fit. The default assumption is that children belong with their mother, and fathers have to fight and pay to prove otherwise. I want to be clear. I'm not saying women don't face challenges in divorce. I'm saying the legal system has baked in biases that disproportionately harm men, and men are finally acknowledging this reality openly. Robert told me about sitting in family court watching the judge barely look at his evidence of equal parenting, financial contribution, and stable home environment. The judge's ruling felt predetermined. I wasn't being evaluated as a father, I was being processed as a checkbook. There's another layer to this that's even more sinister. False accusations. I spoke with a divorce attorney who specializes in representing men. She told me that in about 40% of contested custody cases she handles, the woman makes allegations of abuse or domestic violence. Are all of them false? Of course not. But are some of them strategic? Absolutely. Because here's the thing, an accusation alone can destroy you. You don't have to be convicted. You don't even have to be charged. The accusation is enough to lose custody, lose your reputation, lose your job, and disproving it, that's on you. Guilty until proven innocent. One man named Greg told me his ex-wife claimed he'd hit her. He hadn't. He had never laid a hand on anyone in his life. But suddenly, he needed a restraining order hearing. A lawyer he couldn't afford, and his employer was asking questions. The charges were eventually dropped. She admitted she'd lied, but by then the damage was done. His kids were terrified of him. His neighbours looked at him differently, and he'd spent $40,000 on defending himself. There's a term circulating now, legal liability. Men are starting to view marriage and cohabitation not as partnerships, but as legal risk. Because once you're in the system, once there are shared assets, shared children, shared legal entanglements, you're subject to laws that don't treat you equally. One divorced man wrote, "I did everything right. I was faithful. I was present. I provided. I loved my kids. And when she decided she was done, the state took my money, my house, my time with my children, and handed it all to her. Why would I ever sign up for that again?" This isn't bitterness talking, this is risk assessment. These are men who've learned an expensive lesson and refuse to repeat it. They're looking at marriage the way you'd look at a business contract where all the penalties fall on you and all the benefits go to the other party. You wouldn't sign that contract in business. Why would you sign it in your personal life? So when people ask, why are men giving up on dating? The answer isn't simple. It's not one thing. It's 5 things compounding together into an equation that doesn't work. Overwhelming choice that prevents real connection, multiplied by systems designed to profit from your loneliness, multiplied by endless evaluation against impossible standards, multiplied by emotional labor that flows only one direction, multiplied by legal structures that punish you for participating. You run that equation enough times, and walking away stops looking like giving up. It starts looking like wisdom. But here's what nobody tells you about what happens when men actually walk away. There's a 45-year-old electrician named Vincent who quit dating 3 years ago. No apps, no setups, no just meeting people. He took all that energy, the time, the money, the mental bandwidth, and redirected it. He started woodworking, built a workshop in his garage. Now he makes custom furniture that he sells online and gives to friends. He joined a boxing gym, got into the best shape of his life, started reading again, something he'd abandoned during his marriage, philosophy, history, science fiction. He travels. Nothing extravagant. But he spent last summer hiking through Montana alone, and he told me it was the most peaceful month of his life. When people ask if he's lonely, he says something that stops them cold. I was lonelier in my marriage than I've ever been single. That's what's happening. Men aren't giving up on happiness. They're redefining it. They're discovering that the life they were told they needed, partner, house, kids, the whole package, might not actually be the life they want. A 39-year-old software developer named Brandon told me he tracks his happiness levels. Sounds weird, I know, but he rates each day from 1 to 10 in a journal. His average during his last relationship, 5.2. His average in the 2 years since becoming single, 7.4. He's measurably happier alone. What's he doing with his time? Learning guitar, teaching himself Japanese, planning a 6-month trip through Asia, building a life that doesn't require anyone's approval or permission. He said something that stuck with me. I realized I was trying to fit myself into someone else's vision of what my life should look like. Now I'm living my vision, and it turns out I like it better. There's a growing community of men who've done the math and opted out. They're called different things. MGTOW men going their own way, single by choice, independently fulfilled. The labels don't matter. What matters is they've stopped measuring their worth by whether someone chooses them and started building lives that don't require external validation. One man in his 50s put it beautifully. I spent 30 years trying to be enough for someone else. Now I'm enough for myself, and that's the most radical act I've ever committed. So there they are. 5 brutal reasons men are quitting dating in 2026. 1. The illusion of infinite choice is actually a cage. 2. You're not the customer, you're the inventory. 3. The audit never ends. 4. Emotional labor is a one-way street. 5. The system protector prosecutes you. I'm not here to tell you what to do. If you want to keep dating, date. If you want to get married, that's your choice. But whatever you do, go in with eyes open. Understand what you're actually signing up for. Know the odds. See the system for what it is. And if you've already walked away, if you're one of the men who looked at this system and said, "Not for me," know this. You're not broken. You're not bitter. You're not failing at life. You're making a calculated decision based on lived experience. You looked at the cost-benefit analysis and decided the costs were too high and the benefits too uncertain. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. In 2026, walking away from a bad deal isn't giving up. It's self-preservation. It's choosing peace over performance. It's deciding that your mental health, your financial security, and your emotional well-being matter more than meeting society's expectations. Drop a comment and tell me, which of these 5 reasons resonated most with you? Have you experienced any of these firsthand? And if you know someone who needs to hear this, a friend, a brother, a colleague who's struggling with these same questions, send this their way. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let someone know they're not crazy for seeing what's right in front of them. Eyes open, peace first, see you in the next one.